Mark Warner joining us here on News Radio WRVA. Happy New Year, Senator.
Happy New Year, Rich.
Hope
you're well.
Thank you so much for joining us. How'd you celebrate New Year's?
Well, I was actually with my wife, and we were out of state. And New Year's came and went, and the very next night, in the middle of the night, Secretary Rubio was trying to call me. We missed each other that night, but it was quite getting New Year's off with a bang, I guess.
There's a lot of news. There's a lot of news going on.
Yeah.
So let's jump right into that, because there are a couple things I wanted to touch on. Venezuela was one, and then if we have time, the Affordable Care Act and the subsidies that have expired. So first of all, give me your thoughts. I've read several of your statements, and I listened and went through the transcripts of your interview on NPR. So for our audience, tell us what your position and your thoughts are now a few days later.
Yeah, my position is Maduro was an awful guy. He was corrupt. He was evil to the Venezuelan people. And frankly, the Venezuelan people in 2024 overwhelmingly voted to throw him out. And he didn't respect that election. And one of the things, one of the many mistakes Biden made as president was not at that point having the regional efforts force him out. But the underlying basis of what our claim here was, because Maduro had violated our law, our drug laws, that gives us the opportunity to go in and take him out. I worry on the precedence on that, Rich, that says, okay, well, if Vladimir Putin says Zelensky has broken Russian law, does that mean that Putin could go grab Zelensky? Or does that mean that China could take over Taiwan because Chinese law says that Taiwan is a rogue province? I do worry about the precedence this sets of big countries being able to take on and take out smaller countries simply based upon their view of the law. And if we even said American law is so much better, we're going to be at a higher standard. Under that notion, then the president shouldn't have pardoned the former Honduran president, who was convicted in American courts of being a drug czar, the exact same charges that are being launched against Maduro, yet he got pardoned in that case. So I worry about the precedent setting, number one. Number two, I would just say the military did an extraordinary job here, Rich. I'm constantly amazed at how good our guys are. They get in 150 airplanes launched on and off the ground in less than 40 minutes, no American deaths. It was really remarkable. But it was a military operation. The idea that this is somehow simply serving a warrant doesn't pass the smell test. On a going forward basis, the president has said we're going to run the country, and it's not going to cost Americans a dime. Now, we've heard that before, that don't worry, like after the Iraq war, that the Iraqi oil will pay for it. They're now saying the Venezuelan oil will pay for it. But the only way that we can control the country, if we're not going to put boots on the ground, is to keep that armada off the coast of Venezuela. 20% of our Navy is now based right off the coast of Venezuela. A lot of Virginians, obviously a lot of these ships are home ported in Norfolk. And what I've read, the Venezuelan oil operation, which used to be huge, used to export 4 million barrels of oil a day, only exports 1 million now. It's going to take 2 to 3 years to get that oil operation back up to snuff. Does that mean we're going to have to keep our sailors and soldiers off the coast of Venezuela for 3 years? There was not a good explanation there on what's going to happen on a going forward basis. So kudos to the military. There will be others that will complain. I think the administration clearly did a process foul by not notifying the Gang of Eight beforehand. I'm less focused on that. I'm more focused on both the fact that this could be used, the same reasoning could be used by other countries to extract leaders, and then operationally, how do we make sure that Americans are not on the hook for the cost of this, and how is that going to take place with potentially of our military deployed for many years now?
Senator Mark Warner joining us here on News Radio WRVA. Let's go to the one question, because I've heard that, and that's a very valid concern of what keeps other countries from doing this. So we're right now in a hybrid model. We have non-state actors. We have a narco-terrorist regime that we can call down in Venezuela with the cartel of the Suns and the military actually being involved in the drug trafficking. How does international law recognize the difference between maybe territorial conquest or the right of self-defense against hybrid threats like Venezuela, Maduro, the cartel of the Suns, and how, if that's the case, how does the U.S. respond to these cartel state actors that we see pop up?
I think the way we're in an area, frankly, as you said, uncharted territory with international law. And listen, international law always kind of screws up, but it is kind of the glue that holds the whole system together. I think if the president had made more of the case, and he made the case about this being about drugs, when candidly, the indictment of Maduro doesn't even mention fentanyl. Venezuela doesn't produce the drugs. Cocaine mostly comes from Colombia. It is a bit of a way station. In the hierarchy of drug nations, it is not one of the top couple. And I come back to the fact that we're always viewed, and I think rightfully so, as the good guys. If he could have made more of the case, tried to rally the region, because my fear is, what pushback at all could we have if Putin says he's going to grab Zelensky, he wants to go grab the Polish president? Or let me take it out of that example. I mean, if a large country, let's take India, decides that it doesn't like the leaders of two small countries near it, Sri Lanka or Nepal, and says, well, the leader in this country violated Indian law, so we're going to go grab him. I don't know where this ends. And you could say, well, bad guys are going to do bad stuff anyway. Usually we try to at least have some system of restraint. I don't. We are, again, in areas that I think set a bad precedent. Even some of my Republican colleagues, when I raised this question last night, they said, Warner, you're right on this. And I think the way we could have done a stronger case, for example, people say, what's the difference between now and what happened with Noriega in Panama? Well, with Panama, Noriega said that he was at war with the United States. The Panamanian parliament said they were at war with the United States. Venezuela never said that. So I do worry about this precedent. And now, if the president is talking about Colombia or Mexico next, the thing that worries me as well, I mean, for 70 years, we've tried to say to Central America and South America, doesn't matter Democrat or Republican, hey, we're not going to be an imperial power anymore. We're going to try to treat you with respect. We do want you to do business with us. But all of that bipartisan, hey, we're going to treat you with respect approach kind of went out the window with old school, we're going to have spheres of influence and we get to control everything in the Western Hemisphere. The default of that means, China gets to get everything in East Asia and Russia gets everything that used to be the old Soviet Union. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
So I look at it because I heard the president of Mexico claiming UN Charter Article 2 is saying that, wait a minute, this isn't right. But then I've also read Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution. The president has the right to recognize or not recognize international head of state. So we didn't recognize Maduro during Mike Pompeo as the Secretary of State or Anthony Blinken, and now with Marco Rubio. Does that change your perspective? Because if he's not the legitimate head of state, not recognized by the United States or Secretary of State or the U.S. government, what sovereign protection does he have as a foreign diplomat as opposed to a drug runner?
Yeah, fair question, Rich. The idea of whether we recognize a government or not means that you can then take away their leader. There's a number of nation states around the world where we don't like the leadership. There's a number of others that even where we don't formally recognize, there's certain breakaway regions within Africa. There's a sliver of something called in the part of Russia called Georgia. There's South Ossetia we don't recognize. I've never heard the theory made, though, that just because we don't recognize that breakaway state, that we on our own could go in and grab the leader because we felt that they violated, our laws.
But I don't think
it just goes back. But it goes back then to Rich, like, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. If somebody, do we give Russia laws the same right? Do we give Putin the same right to say to other foreign leaders, hey, you broke Russian law. You can't say anything if we go grab you.
Oh, no, that's a great point. And my retort would be none of those have been indicted by a U.S. court. is actively participating in the drug trade. And you talked about the fentanyl. Nope, absolutely, you're right. Venezuela was not trafficking fentanyl, but they're part of this machine. And we look at the cartels, and so I've done a deep dive on this, Senator. We look at the cartels like the old Scarface or when the Medellin cartel and Pablo Escobar, they've completely changed their whole business plan where he was helping get the cocaine out of Colombia to Venezuela and then getting it north, and it's so complicated it's really hard to do. I have one question.
Let me just ask you. Yes. Let me ask you quickly. Listen. This is a good discussion. I would just say, Rich, cartels are absolutely international evil operations, but our moral case would be much better if we then said, and you know what, we are going to pursue these guys to the wherever, and we pursued under American law and convicted in American court the Honduran president Hernandez. He was serving time for exactly the same crimes that Maduro's been charged with. And then the president, for some political reason, he's never given a full explanation, pardons Hernandez. Doesn't that weaken our moral standing in terms of our war against these bad guys?
Yeah, I thought a lot about that. I think that if I look at it from a strategic standpoint, morality, then that's going to be in the eye of the beholder. But if we talk about this, he's already off the board. So if you show him mercy afterwards, that's up to you and your God and your sense of morality. But to compare him actively with Maduro, who's actually helping bring the poison and eventually the fentanyl in the United States, I don't know if those are apples to apples, sir.
Well, Hernandez was charged with the same kind of bringing the poison to the United States. But let's go to the second part, which is just how long are we going to have to be off the coast of Venezuela to get the operations up so that oil can flow so American taxpayers don't have to bear the burden of this cost?
No, and that's a very important question. I'm glad you're asking this. So here's my big question that our listeners have been asking. Sure. We all agree that Maduro is a bad guy. We all agree that he was a part of this drug trafficking operation and that the people of Venezuela have suffered under his rule. And a couple of our listeners pointed out, the Obama and Biden administrations put out $1 million bounties on his head. So I've kind of boiled this down to one question from our listeners. What could President Trump do, in your mind, to justify snatching up Maduro and bringing him to justice?
Well, if we could, one of the points that were made last night was that by doing the blockade, we can turn off all of Venezuelan oil and basically economically bring them to their knees. I think there is a pretty good case to be made for that. If that is the case, that we could economically bring them to their knees, then should you start with the premise of risking American lives to take him out and extract him? I'm glad Maduro is gone, and thank God our troops came in and out and there were no casualties. But if one of those helicopters had been taken down, if we could have extracted the same economic pressure by simply the blockade, and again, Rich, you're asking a fair question, and this is where kind of the judgments come along about where and how we want to use our military. And it's one of the reasons why, the founders said in this system, we didn't want to have a case where a single person makes a decision. We had that when the Brits ruled us. You're supposed to consult with Congress. You're supposed to kind of reach some kind of consensus on this. Listen, I've worked well with Secretary Rubio. He and I had a subsequent conversation last night for 45 minutes on some of this. But I
would
think this could have been handled differently.
Let me layer one more thing in there, though, because the oil business is so depleted. Like you said, under Chavez, he privatized, or he made it national. They fired all these workers. It's completely collapsed. Right. Yep. So putting that oil blockade on Venezuela, and we've had it in the sanctions, hasn't brought them to their knees because they've replaced the economic engine of Venezuela that used to be oil-based. Now it's cartel drug-based, and that's where the money's coming in to support Maduro. And we hadn't been able to bring him to his knees because that money influx, that engine of their economy, has been drug-based, not oil-based, for several years.
Yeah, I on that one I would have to agree to disagree. In terms of actually the leadership was getting enriched by the drugs. That's what kept the money flowing to Maduro and his cronies. But running the country was still dependent upon that 1 million barrels of oil that they were exporting. They've, because we've got the Armada down there and we were capturing some of these ships because the oil would be moved onto what's called the ghost fleet. Now we can stop that off. Venezuela is sitting on 30 million barrels of oil. They don't know where to put it. They don't have any place to store it. So clearly the Armada has brought the whole nation to its knees economically. Cutting off of the drug flow, cuts off the money that goes to the folks at the top. But we'll see how this plays. And I also feel like the threats that we're going to make at the same time towards Colombia and Mexico, in a region where they've always been suspicious of America, I'd actually rather have them partners than have the whole region allied against us. And I've always loved South America. I was an exchange student in Argentina. I'm fascinated by the culture. But I don't want to. Where we start together is the military did a brilliant job, and Venezuela is better off with Maduro gone.
And where we'll end together is you and I both agree we're looking out for the best interest of the American people and upholding our Constitution and having all branches of government work together efficiently.
Amen. And boy, on that last statement, we got a ways to go.
I'm trying my best, sir.
All your listeners,
I'm trying my best.
All your listeners, let me assure you, to all your listeners, probably some of them more conservative than me, I am at least self-aware enough to realize that I also want to throw a shoe at the TV or at the radio sometimes with some of the knuckleheaded stuff going on. And the only thing I say is I want to throw a shoe at the TV, and sometimes I'm inside the TV. So we got a hell of a lot of room to improve in 26 in terms of making us better functioning.
Absolutely. And again, you have an open invitation. I'm going to do a better job of reaching out and having you come on the program because I found this to be very enlightening.
I used to come on, when I was governor, I loved nothing more than my, monthly sit down. And I love the fact that you're a principled conservative. We can agree and disagree, but we can also start with the premise that we're both extraordinarily proud to be Americans.
100%. 100%. Sir, thank you so much for joining us here on News Radio WRVA. I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you, Rich.
Take care.
Be well.